Robots are machines made by man. They work for humans. However, on some occasions, humans can lose their humanity, as in this case. Fortunately, these robots teach Charles and Emily how to become humans capable of love. In the opening scene of Robots, it's 2032 in New Mexico, and at the border, the president is giving a speech. He says it gives him great pride that they've completed the work of securing the southern border. He talks about how the 11 million people who were in the country illegally have been sent out, and how they can't come back to the country because of the wall. He gives credit to the Tesla Corporation, who created the robots that now do the tasks that the illegals did. The small group of people clap and shout happily at the speech of their president. At the skating rink, Charles, C2 falls while skating, and a woman helps him up. He thanks her, and they introduce themselves. C2 hits on Emily. Next scene, C2 is seen going to work. He helps a woman fold her babysitter. He stops right in front of his office building and watches the community robots making fools of themselves. At the office, C2 tells his father that he handled the work that's been holding them up, and gets flowers for his mom. His dad invites him home, but he tells him he has a date with Emily. His dad praises him for the change he's had this past year, and C2 thanks him. C2 is in a cable car on his date with Emily, and they're kissing. Emily invites him to her home, and he says he wants their first night to be special, so they set the next day. After the date with Emily, C2 goes home with lunch in his hands. At home, he meets another Charles, who's playing video games sitting lazily on his couch. C2 informs Charles that he had a date with Emily, and that he brought him lunch. Charles is annoyed that he failed his game due to C2's blabbering. He tells C2 to put himself onto program, and watches everything he did that day happily, for an opportunity to sleep with Emily. As Charles is washing up, he hears from the news that someone was arrested for having a robot double, as robots are prohibited from civilian usage. He tells C2 to be careful, and that they should no longer go out at the same time. Charles goes to Emily's house and makes love with her. Afterward, he's about to leave when she asks him when they can meet again, and he suggests a month from now. He leaves an angry Emily behind. He goes to the skating rink again, searching for another woman. Someone hits him and he falls. A woman tries to help him, but he pushes her after discovering that the person who hit him is a beautiful woman. She helps him up and they introduce themselves. Charles and Elaine hit it off and go for coffee together. At home, Charles is excited as he tells C2 that he bumped into the most incredible girl, who asked for his number for a change. C2 tells him that Annie wants him to meet her parents, and he tells C2 to dump her nicely. He also tells C2 to focus on getting Elaine horizontal for him. C2 goes on a lot of dates, with Elaine trying to impress her, but she looks suspiciously uninterested in him, and is only excited when he buys her things. On their last day, C2 tells Elaine that he's never felt this way about a girl before, and she says she feels the same way, and to come to her house. She says she wants their first night to be special, so they decide to meet the next day. Charles is playing a video game in his house when he hears clattering from outside. Thinking it's C2, he goes outside, but finds his friend Ashley pretending to be the FBI. Ashley is surprised that Charles knew it was him, and Charles says it was his pronunciation of the word facsimile that gave him away. Charles asks Ashley why he's here. This is his sector. C2 comes in, and Ashley engages him in a conversation, saying that he voted red for the illegals who took their jobs to be sent out. However, after they finally left, the robots came, making it worse, as he now has no gratitude, no respect, and no job. Ashley insults C2, and Charles tells him that he's gone too far. He explains that C2 is basically a slave, and that if he wasn't emotionally deprogrammed every night, he could willingly deport himself to Mexico, as robots now have the same rights as humans. Ashley, who doesn't read, is a little shocked by what Charles tells him. He says he's just joking around, and hugs both Charles and C2. Charles asks how things are going with Elaine, and C2 tells him that she's ready. C2 passes Elaine's address to him, and Charles is happy. He's so happy that he gives Ashley some money. Elaine tells her clone, E2, that Charles wants to sleep with her, so she'll have to take over the next day. She asks for news from the other guys, and E2 tells her about Richard, and that he wants to have dinner. After checking her books, Elaine finds out that he spent too small an amount on her. She tells E2 to dump him nicely, and to go out to sleep with David Lang. In his home, Charles is angry that C2 got lazy, and that he has to be at work the next day. When he goes to work, his personality is different. His father comes in and tells him to tag along for a meeting with the board. Charles is not happy because the meeting clashes with the time he's meant to be with Elaine, but he still agrees. He writes the address of the meeting place down on a sticky note. He rushes home and gives C2, who just finished ironing Charles's clothes, an update. He drops the sticky note on the table, putting it beside the sticky note with Elaine's address. After explaining to a worried C2 that he'll have to go to the board meeting in his stead, Charles grabs the wrong address, handing it to C2. Charles heads to the place with flowers in his hands. He comments, insinuating that Elaine didn't mention that she's rich. The butler takes him to the room. It's dark, and Charles speaks dirty. The light is switched on, and he is shocked when he sees his father and the board seated and waiting for him. Embarrassed, Charles quickly heads out of the room. When he's out of the house entirely, he calls C2, telling him they switched addresses and that he should go home. From his phone, Charles watches C2, but sees that he and Elaine are already making love. C2 and E2 spend hours together and fall in love. The next day in his house, Charles wakes up on his couch to his alarm. Charles calls for C2, but he doesn't answer. The scene switches, and Elaine is in her car in front of her house. She leaves a message for E2 asking if they're done so she can come inside, but gets no answer. Back in his house, Charles checks his Uber receipt and gets the address of Elaine's house. Elaine sneaks into her house from the back, and immediately, Charles drives up her street. He parks and enters the house from the front. As they go around the house, they both meet in a room. They pretend as though they were the ones meeting last night, and move to the parlor. In the living room, they both try to get information about the previous night when their phones ring. On his side, Charles asks C2 where he is, and C2 tells him that Elaine also has a double. He explains that she never wanted sexual intimacy, but just wanted gifts and money. On her side, E2 explains that all Charles wanted was sexual intimacy. They say that when a womanizer and gold digger come together, things may not turn out well for them, but their robots have better chances. E2 and C2 tell them goodbye, and that they're going to find freedom. Finding out that they used each other, and that their robots just ran away, is a shock to both of them. Angry, Elaine throws whatever she finds at Charles, who dodges them. Charles tells her to calm down, and that as much as he hates it, they need to work together and track the robots down. Elaine wants to meet the people who made the robots, as they are guilty, and they find out that their robots were made by the same person, Zach Newman. Their drive down to Zach's house is not as smooth as they both argue. Charles accuses Elaine of duping rich men, and she says she's duping people who are cheaters, while he's duping innocent girls. They reach Zach's house, and Zach is angry with Charles, who told him earlier that he wanted to have the robot take care of his dying parents. As Zach tries to find their location, Charles asks Elaine how she's able to afford a 2 million Dogecoin robot, and she says she had an agreement with Zach. He asks what kind, but she says it's not his business. He can track the robots down to Socorro. They are happy, but the happiness is short-lived, especially for Charles, who throws a tantrum when they find out that they have to destroy the robots, since they are starting to humanize. They won't obey any longer, and instead seek revenge. Zach says they're going to be a handful, so he needs them to follow him. Charles needs to relieve himself. In the bathroom, Charles calls Ashley and tells him a little about the situation. He asks him to get Fat Ninja ready to move, and Ashley agrees. Zach drives, and Charles is uncomfortable during the drive, due to the music. It's night when they get to their destination. Zach gives them a special gun to immobilize the robots, and when Charles shoots it, Elaine calls him a child. They go up to the room the robots are in, and see them making love. Busting into the room, Elaine shoots the both of them to Charles's annoyance. When she finds things E2 stole from her, stays back to pick them up as Zach and Charles take the robots, which are rolled in the sheets, to the car. Elaine feels a movement, and is attacked by someone. Hearing the ruckus from the car, Charles rushes to the room with Zach at his back and tries to stop Ashley, who thinks they're robots. After finding out they're not robots, Zach, who's been making sure Elaine is alright, angrily asks Charles who Ashley is. They find out that Charles sent Ashley there to steal the robots, but he assures them that the robots are in the car. At that moment, they hear the car engine roar. They all run downstairs and see the car zooming off. Elaine is livid. She's angry that she ever trusted Charles, and he apologizes, saying that he just wanted to get the robots back, because life without them would be messy. Angry, Elaine tells him that maybe he'll have a messy life no matter what, because he's a messed up person. Alone, Zach tells him that she has a point, and that maybe it's time for him to change his life. He even recommends a toad venom ceremony that changed his life. Charles agrees, saying maybe he doesn't need a robot. The next day, Charles wakes up. He encourages himself and even practices being nice in the mirror while brushing, and even in the bath. In his office at Cameron, Charles sees his father and the board. His father tells him he needs help and shows him a video of himself C2 causing a mess the previous night. Charles gives an excuse that he's on drugs, and his father tells him to take some time off, as he's only human. In his home, Charles is doing his laundry when he gets a call from Elaine. He explains that C2 trashed his office, and admits that it was his fault. He asks if they should meet up, and promises that he has no more tricks. They meet up, and are seated in front of a restaurant. Elaine tells him that it's been the worst week of her life. She asks if they should run to Mexico themselves, and Charles says no, that they should just hunt them down and destroy the robots. Elaine says she needs to use the restroom, and uses the opportunity to rush into Charles's car, and drive off. As he runs after the car, he meets the real Elaine, who's also going after her car, as they've just been tricked by their robots. They poke each other's eyes, just to be sure they are real. Elaine says that she told C2 that they're planning to destroy him, and Charles asks if she's stupid. They watch as the robots take Elaine's car, and she says they've also developed tastes aside from vengeance. Charles and Elaine go after them. They stop somewhere as they are extremely thirsty, but E2 stole Charles's credit card, and so did C2 to Elaine. Elaine receives a message from E2 that they are in Mexico, and when they see this, Charles and Elaine hug, relieved and happy. This happiness is short-lived, however, as Charles receives a message from C2 saying that they might want to come down to Mexico too, with an attached video of how they are robbing a bank. Charles and Elaine are shocked and scared. They go down to Mexico, as they've been perfectly framed and have no choice. Charles says he knows somewhere they can stay. He takes them to a place at the top of the mountain, and they have to make do with few resources. Not knowing how to do anything, Elaine fetches the fire, makes it, and even prepares dinner. Charles, who's been lazing about in a blanket, says they make a great team, and Elaine gets angry. She quarrels with him for being lazy and taking her as his new robot while she does all the work around. He counters, saying he provided the house, but she says it's his dad's. Angry, she goes to the table and lays down on the chairs beside each other. Charles walks up to her and apologizes. He tells her to come and lay by the fire, saying he has no right to stay there. He tries to drag her there, but she ends up falling, because Charles is only dragging the end of the second chair. She tells him to get out. Giving up, Charles goes back to his seat, after putting the plates in the sink and grabbing the bourbon and a glass. Elaine joins him by the fire, and takes the wine and glass from his hands. She says she still hates him, but they have a drink together. They drink till they get drunk. They have fun as they dance and play, also burning papers to make the fire hotter. They both fall asleep on the sofa. The next morning Elaine wakes up, but Charles is not there. He brings her a cup of coffee for a hangover. He says they must get off the mountain, as the cops will soon find them, and Elaine agrees. He says Mexico is their only choice, and Elaine asks how they'll get there, since every cop is searching for his car. Charles takes her outside, where he shows her his car, which is now painted green and orange. He tells her he got up early to do it, and she's impressed. She asks if they should get going, but he suggests they should take lunch first. When she tries to go prepare some, he refuses and tells her to follow him to the woods. He shows her his fishing lodge. Charles fishes for lunch as Elaine watches. She asks how much longer, and they still need to wait about 3 or 4 hours. Charles asks if she wants to try, saying she needs patience, but Elaine uses the gun instead. She takes the fish out of the water to hit Charles, who threatens to throw her into the river. Then they have lunch. This time Elaine drives, and the drive is nice, as they now get along. They are stopped by a police car immediately when they reach Mexico. Charles starts panicking, and Elaine tells him to calm down, and that she'll do the talking. The officer takes their card and comes back later. Charles, though scared, tells the officer that he's the one, and that Elaine doesn't have anything to do with it. The officer asks why he will paint his brake lights, and tells him to scrape them off. Realizing that they are safe, even after their cards were run by the officer, Charles and Elaine check the video again and discover that it was fake. They go through posts and find out that the robots have been living the time of their lives, and that they aren't even in Mexico. Emily asks if they have enough gas to get to the border, and Charles says no, but that they have enough to reach his stepdad's house in Santa Fe, a place they've seen in the posts, and that they're going to get their lives back. They drive back, and at night they stop at a store to get some snacks and disguise themselves. They head to the house and find a perfect spot to park. Charles and Elaine sit on the car trunk, looking through binoculars, and talking about how messed up it is that their robots are probably in the bar, telling people how they complete each other. Then they fall asleep on the trunk. The next morning, Charles and Elaine wake up to the sound of a jet, drawing their names in the clouds. After looking thoroughly through the binoculars, they find out that C2 and E2 are about to get married. Charles asks what to do, and Elaine says they should go and stop their wedding. Charles and Elaine dress up as robots and infiltrate the house. Charles watches as his cousin confesses, saying that he's sleeping with his ex-girlfriend. They attend the short meeting, as C2 announces why he and E2 are getting married so fast. They perform a dance show and tell the crowd to enjoy. Taking this opportunity, Charles finds his way to C2's room. He shoots him, while Elaine finds her way to E2's room and shoots her. They carry them in a body bag and pass them over the balcony. As they pass through the kitchen, Charles tells Elaine to go ahead and that he'll catch up, and he puts Nutella in the burgers. They drag C2 and E2 to their cars and drive out of the place. In the car, Charles asks if Elaine has any bright ideas to get rid of their passengers, since the guns are running low. They carry them to a cliff and throw C2 into the river. As Elaine tries to get her jewelry off E2, Charles is shocked when he sees C2 swimming to shore. He notifies Elaine, and by the time they turn back, E2 is running. They shoot her again, and she falls. Charles comes up with an idea, saying that since C2 loves E2, if he discovers that E2 is into him, then he'll come to them. But Elaine reminds him that she's deprogrammed, and won't obey. Elaine says she has an idea, and they drag E2 to the Jeep. They take E2 to Zach's house, and Elaine tells Zach to bring out E3. Charles is shocked that there's an E3, and Elaine explains that she used to work with Zach, and he liked her, or maybe was even obsessed with her, and installed a camera in her house, so she made a deal with him to either call the cops or build her a robot double. She also allowed him to build one for his personal use. After hearing the creepy story, they tell Zach, who denies bringing out E3. E3 comes out, introducing herself as Elaine. Elaine explains to her that she's now to be E2, and to be in love with Charles so that they can make a video, and E3 happily complies. C2 is walking through the streets when he receives a call. He sees Charles and asks for E2. Elaine tells him to come and get her, but he recognizes her. When E3 comes as E2, he's convinced that they've done something to her while at Zach's, as they've claimed. They cut the call and, worried, C2 turns back, stealing a scooter. At Zach's house, Charles suggests that they should set some positions for an ambush, and Elaine agrees. He tells her to keep a lookout while he stays at the door. E3 tries to come onto him, and they tell E3 that the act is over, but she doesn't listen. They even call the safe word that Zach gave them earlier, but she still doesn't, and almost forces herself on Charles. Elaine calls Zach, who didn't answer on time, but finally hears and comes out, putting an end to it. Elaine laughs at Charles as he puts on his clothes. Meanwhile, an officer notices C2 driving a stolen scooter and notifies her sheriff as they pursue him. C2 comes to Zach's house, and Elaine shoots him at the door, but it doesn't work, as it is painted. The police, who followed C2, enter the house and arrest them all. At the police station, they discover that they have the same fingerprints and that they can't be twins. The sheriff is excited and informs them that the humans will be in jail for 40 years and the robots will be gone. He says he'll be back with the federal robot enforcement agents the next day. Leaving their cell, he tells the officer that he'll be on Fox News the next day, ignoring the fact that she is the one who discovered them. In their cell, Elaine and Charles complain about their food, and Charles makes a statement saying that the robots are lucky. C2 and E2 explain that they don't need a lot of things as robots, since they were built to live as slaves, but that they still found the love humans shunned, even though it was unexpected, and would rather perish as robots with love than live as humans without it. Realizing that they've been idiots, Charles asks to make a phone call to his lawyer, and calls Ashley. He tells him that he's been arrested, and that he's at the sheriff's office. He thanks him for stressing the fat ninja. He apologizes, giving the phone back to the woman who's been observing the call. Sitting down, Charles says that their hands are in the hands of Ashley. The police officer is seated at her desk when she gets a report about 4 identical robots and she rushes out. Immediately after the officer leaves, Ashley sneaks in, finds the key, and breaks them out. At their car, Ashley tells Charles that he doesn't have to go to Mexico, and that he can always destroy the robots, but he tells him not to worry. Charles thanks him, saying that they'll cross the border, and Elaine hurries him up. In the car, C2 and E2 are excited as they are close to freedom. They say they'll get married, and live near a beach. But when they ask Elaine and Charles, they say they'll see each other as friends. They reach the border, and E2 is granted entry to Mexico. Elaine tries to get entry, but because she has an identical retina scan to E2, she's not granted entry. The police have come, and Charles orders C2 to go past the border, saying he can't leave Elaine. They hug, and Charles thanks C2 for showing him to be human. C2 passes the border, then Elaine and Charles kiss. The police reach them, and the woman beside the sheriff scans their eyes, confirming that they're humans. The sheriff tries to arrest them for robot facsimile, and when the woman asks for evidence, and he can't give any, she tells him never to call her again. Relieved that they're not getting arrested, Elaine asks what he wants to do, and Charles kisses her. The scene changes to them kissing at the reception of their wedding. Charles says it's the best day of his life, and they dance till the scene fades out.